Right. So you're all welcome to today's episode of FTSM podcast. I have a wonderful person here to discuss abortion. I mean, since the first time I posted this flyer, it went crazy. I mean, I had so many reactions from people that I've never had from all the other topics. But I mean, no matter how controversial the topic is, we still have to talk about it and still need to get informed about it and then make the right decisions going forward. So let me just introduce my guest in a minute. So Hannah, at least I've known you for some time. Went to the same church in Delaware, and seen most of your posts on abortion and things like that. So it actually gave me the idea and understanding that you have a lot of knowledge and you're versed in that field to be able to help our audience and people watching us to understand this topic a lot better. So, I mean, you grew up in Georgia, right?
Yes.
Which part of Georgia did you grow up?
Well, so I was actually born in Mississippi, but my middle and high school years were in Georgia. I was in a military family, so I kind of moved around a little bit, but I was in Warner Robins, a couple hours south of Atlanta.
Okay. And then the other thing is, I see you're part of the Students for Life of America,
yes.
Right? Yes, and I think you're in about 1,300 campuses.
Yeah, we're on over 1,300 campuses across the country currently.
Okay, that's good. So, I mean, that means you go to these schools, high schools, middle schools, colleges to tell people about abortion, pro-life, and the reason why they have to make these choices?
Yeah, so we work to support student pro-life clubs and groups on campuses, essentially. So we have a lot of materials for them. We help train them and mobilize them as the pro-life generation in our country, and go to their schools and kind of help them through what it looks like to be a pro-life activist. That's what we do.
No, okay, that's great. So, I mean, then that means so you've really had time to tell people about this, so you know exactly what you're going to do, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so because most of the time I know people are just passionate about something, but then they don't have the knowledge to back their passion.
Right. Yeah, I've done a lot of research, and our organization's done a lot of research, and try to stay up to date on everything and make sure we know as much as we can. I'm not an expert, but I know a lot. So.
Oh, I know, but I've seen most of your posts and things, and I can say you're an expert. At this time for us to be able to help us understand, because I've never really seen someone, maybe I haven't really followed it, but I've never really seen someone that passionate about abortion, talk about it that open and everything. I haven't really seen that, yes. But then we have you today here to be able to help us in the next, 1 hour to be able to discuss this and then get us understanding. So tell us a little bit about your organization that you're part of.
Yeah, so like I said, Students for Life we're the largest pro-life youth organization in the world. So we work with student groups on more than 1,300 campuses, like you said, middle school, high school, college, university, even medical and law school campuses. So we're kind of all over the place, all 50 states. I got started with the organization originally as a regional coordinator. So for the past year or so, I was working specifically with campus groups, and my whole job was going to campuses and talking to people about abortion and just trying to get that conversation going. A lot of people don't like to talk about it because it is so controversial and it's so dividing, it seems, these days. So just getting that conversation going in a loving way and trying to change people's minds. I've now moved into more of a logistical role. So I'm now coordinating our national events, because we do have a lot of national events. We put on the largest pro-life conference in the world the day after the March for Life in Washington, D.C. So I'm working on that. But yeah, we just do our best to start the conversation. And our goal is to train, equip, and mobilize the pro-life generation students on campuses to abolish abortion in our lifetime. So that's the goal, and we're working towards it.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah. So, it means that okay, give me a second. So you've had time to be able to talk to people about abortion. Have you had any backlash from speaking on abortion?
Yeah, quite a bit. It's only gotten worse over the past year, obviously, with a lot of the conversation getting heated in our country around it. It's gotten a little bit worse. I've been called every name in the book. I've been spit on and pushed and shoved. I haven't personally, but some of my coworkers and students have been punched in the face before. We often have to bring like security with us to larger events because people are very, very hostile, and it's been an adventure. I never thought I'd be as hated as I am these days.
I can imagine. So why hasn't all of these backlash and all of these blowbacks hasn't deterred you from doing what you're doing, right?
Not at all. I think when there's an injustice that's taking place, and I perceive abortion to be the greatest injustice of our lifetime, then I can't sit back regardless of what happens to me with bodily harm or people being rude or whatever it is. I can't sit back and just let the injustice continue. I believe that it's my duty to stand up and say something and do something and work to shift culture towards hopefully less hostility from this subject. So
okay, so it means that most of the people who don't agree with you tend to use other means to be able to get their message across rather than having a discussion.
It depends. It really depends. I think because a lot of what I do, I'm in the greater DC area, so I do go to a lot of protests and rallies and things. And obviously it's a lot more heated there where we have people coming against us, or you have the more fringe, passionate people. But I have also encountered so many people that disagree with me that are willing to have a conversation and are willing to get into the nitty gritty of it and actually discuss it. And I've actually found that most of the time when people do talk to me, we end up finding more that we agree on than that we disagree on. And even if we end the conversation knowing that we fundamentally disagree on whether abortion's a human right or not, it's still, we've found all these different areas that we're coming from the same angle of wanting people to be supported and cared for and loved. And that's really encouraging too.
That's great to hear. So I mean, so it means that it boils down to discussion. We talking about it. We getting people aware of what is right and what is wrong, basically.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So let's get into the meat of the conversation. So
yes.
Before I started, I had to go look up the meaning of abortion, because even though we naturally have come to understand what abortion is, we don't probably know the gray details of abortion. So in your own way, like, how would you explain what abortion is?
The basic way that I like, my talking point kind of way that I always explain it, is abortion intentionally ends the life of a preborn human being. There's several different types of abortions. They're not all the same. They work in different ways, but the end goal of an abortion is to go in and end intentionally another person's life while they're still living within the womb. That's what an abortion is. And I think it's really important to really look into the reality of that, because we hear the word abortion all the time in our society. It's very common. So it's very easy to get desensitized, and we just hear the word abortion. It feels very normal. But then looking deeper into abortion is actually taking someone else's life. That is a lot harder to digest, and something that we need to look a little bit deeper into. Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, when I was reading that, one of the things I realized is that abortion is mostly performed during the 28 weeks of pregnancy. So within that 28 weeks, is the baby still a human being, or is it just a fetus? Is it just blood in the woman's stomach? What is it? So within that 28 weeks, doesn't the woman have the right to choose to terminate the baby before she grows into a full-blown baby in the stomach?
Yeah, I think this is where one of the big misconceptions is. I hear a lot. People always come back of, it's not a human yet, it's not a person yet, it's not a baby yet. But scientifically, if we're looking at it, human life starts at fertilization. That is something that 96%, to be exact, 96% of secular biologists agree that human life starts at fertilization. So from the very first moment of conception, a unique, living, whole human being has come into existence. They have their own DNA that's separate from the mother and the father, that has never been created before. It can never be created again. You can't repeat this human being. The DNA contains everything that they will be for the rest of their life, their hair color, skin color, eye color, personality traits, all of that's already there from the very first moment. We know that they're living because living things come from other living things, and they're already, even from the very first basic cell stages, responding to stimuli, they're growing, they're developing, they're metabolizing energy. So it's very clear that they are already a human being from the first moment of fertilization. Yeah.
Wow. So so that means that then we move to the point where the woman also says that I'm the one carrying the baby. Mm-hmm. I should tend to decide whether the baby lives or die, and probably I'm at risk in a certain way keeping the baby in my tummy. What would you? Because that's where I've heard people talk about the most, where it's my body. I decide what is in my body or what doesn't stay in my body. So what do you think? Because then it comes to a person's choice than more of what is scientific or not.
Right. Yeah. And I think this comes more into, like, we move from a scientific question into more of a philosophical human rights discussion of, the human rights of a woman having bodily autonomy is the words that are used all the time. And I agree with that on a basic stance. I agree with this bodily autonomy idea of women having the right to choose what happens with their body. And I fully agree with that. Like, obviously someone can't force a medical treatment on me against my consent because I have the right to choose those things. However, because this is another human being, our bodily choice does not usurp another person's, especially when it comes to my choice over my body is also choosing to end another person's life. That's where we don't have the right to do so. I am a big believer in everybody having the right to do whatever they want to do, as long as you're not intentionally harming or killing another person. And abortion does harm or kill another person.
Okay, so I can understand that. So for a Christian, I've had people ask me, why do we want to impose what we believe on other people?
Right. I've heard this a lot too, and I am a Christian, and I obviously we know each other from church, so we know that I am a Christian, and my first experience with the pro-life beliefs, I guess, came from my faith of this idea that God has value for all human beings. But from a political standpoint, personally, I agree that I don't think that my religion should be the basis for all laws, because we have this freedom of religion in our country that's so great. However, again, I don't view this as a religious issue as much as a human rights issue when it comes down to another person. And that's why when I discuss this most of the time with people, I stick to, let's talk about science of what a human being is. Let's talk about, who gets human rights and who doesn't, because that has nothing to do with my religion. That just has to do with humanity being valuable.
Yes. But I mean, people will still want to find a way of driving Christianity into the conversation just so that the argument is lost from the beginning. Yeah. So I don't know how else, we can get this information out there by separating religion from this whole conversation, because people even think that the whole Roe v. Wade case overturned has everything to do with religion, other than probably the facts of the Constitution and what the judges think. So in your own opinion, what do you think? How do we deassociate religion, faith, and whatever we believe in from our constitutional rights and all the legal matters that are being discussed around?
Yeah, I do think that our religious beliefs obviously are going to tie into what we believe about the world. I have this biblical worldview that I can't get out of. I can't make myself not have a biblical worldview, because that's what I believe. But at the same time, I can recognize that I believe that other people have the same rights as me to practice their religion as well. And, if there were aspects of my religion that were harming people, then that shouldn't be allowed in our country. You know what I mean? I think there's just this reality of looking at what makes the most sense for the population as a whole, and ending the life of other human beings just doesn't make sense no matter how you look at it. And, we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but the whole Roe v. Wade discussion that's come up right now of people saying that, the justices are imposing their religious values on people. It actually has nothing to do with that. It only has to do with the Constitution. And it always just comes right back down to, do we as human beings, regardless of our belief system and including our belief system in every way, do we have the right to choose life life or not choose life for another person. And I don't believe that we do.
All right. So, and then in the case of like medical reasons, complications and all of that, would you recommend someone to go for an abortion?
Yeah, so this is a big discussion right now too. This is especially with what's happening in our country. We've heard a lot of questions about medical circumstances. Ectopic pregnancy is a big one that's come up, and also, you know, a diagnosis of the fetus, of a medical condition that they have. There's all kinds of different. It's hard to give a completely across the board answer because every person's situation is different of what's happening with their lives. But I do know that we've talked to a lot of experts that are doctors that are in this field that have said that abortion is never medically necessary. There are certain treatments that have to be done for a fetus or for the mother, where even though we're treating both the mother and the child as patients, there are situations where that child might not survive, but the treatment for that is different than an abortion. It's different, you know, when a woman has an ectopic pregnancy, let's say, so she has, you know, the embryo has implanted in the fallopian tube rather than in the uterus, and it's not going to survive through that pregnancy. And it will, if it continues to grow, it'll kill the mother too. That's a very real situation. There's a lot of ectopic pregnancies that take place in the United States every single year. It's a very serious condition. But removing a damaged part of a fallopian tube, and most of the time, by the time they go to do that, the embryo is already passed anyway at that point, is very different. And the child's dying naturally at that point. It's very different than a very invasive procedure of abortion that does have a lot of complications of health risks to mother, that always ends the life of another human being brutally and violently. And I just think that there's a lot better options for people out there than that violence.
All right. And then the next thing is, I'm sure you've heard this one too before. So what if someone was raped and then they just don't want to have maybe, and sometimes you don't even know who raped you. It could be anybody, anything, that anyone. And you don't want to keep that animal's baby in your womb or in your tummy. You don't want to give birth to someone's baby. You have no idea his DNA. You have no idea his family background. You know nothing about him. You don't want to keep that baby. What would you say in that instance?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to establish the fact that we know as human beings that rape is not okay. Obviously, I would be hard pressed to find someone that thinks that rape is okay, obviously. And people that experience that deserve to be given justice. They deserve to be loved and supported and cared for and given every resource they possibly can. And personally, I believe that there's a lot of work to be done on the justice part of that, of prosecuting people to the full extent of the law when we are able to figure out who it was that did this heinous crime. And I think there's a lot of support that needs to be still worked on to be given to people that experience this. I've experienced sexual assault before, and I've had a lot of friends that have as well. And it's violent and it's horrible, and no one deserves that against their body. But we also have to look at the reality that when we have a traumatic situation like this that happens, having an abortion doesn't actually remove the trauma that person's experienced. And it actually piles more trauma through the abortion experience on top of what they already have. You know, if a woman goes into an abortion facility after going through a rape situation, they don't normally follow up with her with medical care afterwards. They don't follow up with her with therapy. They don't work through this process with her. So she just is walking around traumatized and not knowing where to place her grief. And it's heartbreaking. Whereas we want to get her the help that she actually needs. And then you have to also look at the side of, this is another human being. You know, again, this preborn entity is a human being that is not responsible for the sins of their parents. And we can't value people differently based on the circumstances surrounding how they were conceived, right? We don't rate birth certificates of, oh, your parents loved each other, so you get an A+, and your dad was terrible, so you get a D. That's just not how it works. People are valuable because they're people, and it's not fair to end the life of another human being because of something that their parent did.
All right. But then the mother knows exactly what she went through by conceiving that child. And that should probably seeing that child every day would look like remembering her past and remembering that incident every now and then when she lays eyes on that child. And so she doesn't want to go through that for the rest of her life.
Right.
She rather wants to end the life of that child early enough, and then give herself that peace for the rest of her life.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that most women don't have a lot of peace after abortion. It's not, you can't erase the memory of your baby, and that's trauma that people experience for a long time. So you can't erase that memory. And I would say, because I do believe that that's a very real situation. I agree that could be extremely traumatizing, but there are other options, right? I think the adoption system gets a really bad rep these days, where there are such loving, caring families that the mother has the right to place that child with an adoptive family, so that she doesn't have to go through that everyday trauma, but we're also not being unfair to another person who wasn't responsible for what their father did, you know?
All right. Yeah. So, and then the other thing is, so what if a scan has been done, and then the doctor says that the child is going to be born with certain deformities and Down syndrome, whatever it is that the child is going to be born with, and then the doctor advises that we'll be better off terminating the life of this child now than bringing him into this world. I don't know if that's what a doctor will say. I'm just So than bringing this child to this world to probably suffer and not really have a normal life. Would you recommend that that child we should end the misery of that child, if that's so to speak, than to bring him into the world and leave him to suffer and leave him to go through life without all his full capacities?
I think what we're doing in that situation, if someone is to recommend abortion in that situation, I think it's with a good heart, right? Again, I look back at what's the heart behind why people are thinking this way, and it's because they don't want someone to suffer. But is it better to just eliminate the sufferer rather than eliminate the suffering that could come about? You know, like this comes up in all kinds of conversations, and I don't think that it's necessarily better for somebody to just not be alive than for them to have difficulty in life. And that opens up into this whole other conversation of, we all have difficulty in life. I've never met anyone that didn't have difficult times in their life, and I'm not belittling the situation. Obviously that is really difficult, and it's difficult on parents that have children that have special needs, right? But maybe we work to make life in society more supportive of parents that have children with special needs, rather than just eliminating that person altogether. It's interesting too, on the flip side of this, I was actually reading an article today about this, the article came out a while ago. I was just reading it, but there was a medical testing group that they found that they had an 85% false positive rate on testing for fetal diagnoses. So that meant that there was all these people that were making plans to have abortions, or even went through with having abortions, because they felt that their child was going to have an unhealthy life and they were going to suffer and all these things. And it turned out their child was completely unhealthy. It's a very, very high number of times that women are told that their child's going to suffer for the rest of their lives. They should probably have an abortion. They decide not to, and then their baby's born totally, completely fine. So again, I think this potential suffering situation is not necessarily grounds to just end someone's life before they've even really gotten a chance to breathe and see the sun and be a part of our society.
So every child should be given the chance to live and figure out life for themselves.
Yes. And there are field diagnoses where it is tragic that it happens, that that the child won't live more than a couple of hours, but we want to give people dignity, right? We believe in being pro-life from conception to natural death, right? So giving that child the ability to die a natural death, which sounds so terrible, but is that worse than going in with tools to dismember them when they can feel pain in the womb and dismember them, rip them out limb by limb? No, it's obviously gives them so much more dignity to allow them to live as long as they can and give them the medical care that they deserve.
So you talking about, going to the medical center for them to use tools to get the baby out. I thought that used to be like what happened then. I didn't know it still happens now. That is how I thought that was a more creative way of getting the baby out than just using the tools. I mean, do they still use the tools to get the baby out?
They do. It depends. So there's different types of abortions depending on how far along a woman is in pregnancy. So second trimester-ish abortions, those are dilation and evacuations. They're also called D&E. Those, we call them dismemberment abortions because that's exactly what they do. They use a pair of forceps and they tear apart the fetus limb by limb and then crush the skull, check to make sure that they see brain. I know it's graphic, but they check for white fluid, which is brain matter, to know that they've crushed the skull, and they remove that as well. And then they check to make sure that they have all the pieces. And at that point, that the fetus can actually feel pain at that point as well. So they're feeling every excruciating, painful thing that's happening to them. And that's just one of the types of abortions. I mean, all of them are barbaric and violent.
Wow. So that means, does the mother also go through any type of pain throughout the process?
There is a risk of complications for mothers as well. With any type of surgical abortion, obviously there's risk of perforation to the uterus, perforation to other organs, hemorrhaging, death, especially if you look at one of the main type of abortion done these in our current day society, whatever, is chemical abortion is the big one. So most abortions in the United States are chemical abortions. Those are 4 times riskier than surgical abortions are. And those, I mean, there's all kinds of complications you can look up. There's 24 women that we know of that have died from chemical abortion alone, and it hasn't really been around in our country very long either. So that's scary.
Wow. So this is really scary though. I mean, you explaining the whole abortion process, people could lose their lives. So why would they still choose to go through that process?
Yeah. And I mean, I will say it's something that I don't blame people for choosing abortion as an option, because I mean, I'm a young woman and I'm on the internet, right? So yeah. I get the ads too. I get the ads from Planned Parenthood through my Facebook feed. Like I get all these things all the time, and the misinformation is so widely spread. And that's part of why we're doing what we're doing, of spreading actual information of, hey, you know, they're going to tell you that this pill, this abortion pill you take, is going to be totally safe. You'll be totally fine. But what you don't know is that women called into the FDA and have all this trauma that they've experienced, or women that they weren't really checked to see if they had an ectopic pregnancy before they took the pill, and now they have all these horrible complications because they weren't diagnosed with it, and it could have been avoided. Like all these things that people just don't realize because it doesn't sound good, right? If people are trying to sell you a medical procedure and make money off of it too, because that's the other thing, is the abortion industry profits off of this greatly. So if they're trying to sell you this medical procedure, they're not going to tell you all the complications. We also don't have a federal law of informed consent, essentially, of what women are required to be told prior to having an abortion. So that's state by state. So some women aren't even informed of the risks and complications that could come from having an abortion procedure, and they're just told, yeah, it'll be safe, quick, and easy. And they're not even told that you could possibly never be able to carry a pregnancy term again. You could possibly be rendered completely sterile and not be able to have children from this procedure. They might have made a different choice if they'd known that was a risk.
Wow. So what about, so has there ever been an instance where someone actually goes through a rigorous like exercise to be able to get rid of the baby or something like that? I mean,
like a at-home abortion, you mean? Or
no, not just like someone just engages in something risky, just knowing that it will end the baby's life without going through the hospital, going through the whole process of being vetted and all of that.
I mean, it happens, I'm sure. I know that this has been a big discussion recently of, you know, I'm told every single day, right? Women are still going to have abortions. You're just removing their way to do it safely is kind of the big conversation right now. So, I mean, it's interesting though, because again, I want people to be safe. I want people to be cared for. And the reality is, with even before Roe v. Wade, right? So people talk about back alley abortions a lot. People want to talk about, you know, people trying to perform their own abortions in a back alley and then getting infected. That's actually not what back alley abortions meant. And back alley abortions prior to Roe were the same as the abortion procedures that we have today, or the ones that happened after Roe. It's just the reality of the doctors were doing them illegally versus legally. There's always people that are going to break the law and do things outside of the law, but just because we're doing something through a hospital versus, in a bedroom doesn't make it any more safe at all, because the procedure itself is not safe.
It's not safe. All right. So, I mean, if a mother came to you saying she's dying, I mean, there are complications from the pregnancy she has right now, and she just wants to take the baby out and be free, what advice would you give to that mother?
Yeah, my first advice is to find a doctor that treats both you and your child as a patient. I think that's a very, very big thing. There's a lot of doctors that will be very quick to, okay, let's just terminate the pregnancy, because they are treating the mother as a patient, but they forget that there's a secondary patient here. So you want to find a doctor that cares for you and your baby. A pro-life doctor's response in these situations is, let's do everything we can to save both of your lives, right?
Yes.
And most cases, it's majority of the time, if a woman's going to die from her pregnancy, it's from going all the way through to the 9th month of pregnancy and then going through childbirth, right? So let's get creative with an idea, right? Maybe we get your child to the point of viability where it can survive outside of the womb. We induce an early labor, and then we treat both of you with every medical means necessary to try to save both of your lives. That's so much more loving and realistic than, okay, let's just go dismember your child so that you can survive. That doesn't seem very loving at all.
All right. So, I mean, you've pretty much explained, and you've explained away all my questions. So it's making it hard for me to come up with questions, because you've already explained them. So it's like I have to just keep repeating them in different ways to be able to get you to talk about them. So we just have to go to Roe v. Wade, and then we would sort of circle back around them again. Yeah. So in fact, when I was reading about Roe v. Wade, it took the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade for me to read about Roe v. Wade. I didn't really know much about Roe v. Wade. I just knew it gave people the right to abort their babies, basically federally. It's become a law constitutionally where everybody can abort their baby. Then June 2022, it's overturned. I mean, I saw a lot of Christians jubilating. They were happy because something they had prayed for had finally come to pass. Yes. Then I saw another group of people who felt like this is really an injustice being done to certain group of people who want to have the freedom to choose whatever they want to do with their bodies. And they don't see why a few men up there should decide for the rest of the world or for the rest of Americans. Right. But then it's the same way that I think a few people also decided, 49 years ago, for the rest of the country. So let's get into Roe v. Wade. Let me not even take away any of the information. So.
Yes. Yeah, I think Roe v. Wade has been on the chopping block for a long time. I mean, when I came into this work, my first goal was all right, we got to get rid of Roe, and now we're past Roe. So it's been a fight for 49 years that we've been fighting for, and I get people again all the time of, okay, Roe's overturned, the Supreme Court took away our right to abortion. Mm-hmm. No, what the Supreme Court actually said is that you never had a constitutional right to abortion. And that's the whole point, because 49 years ago, this group of, 7 men decided that based on a right to privacy, which is also not technically in the Constitution, by the way, but because of a right to privacy between a woman and her doctor, that paved the way for people to be able to have abortions up to viability. And then in conjunction with the sister case, Doe v. Bolton, abortions essentially through all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason on a federal level. So that was Roe v. Wade, and it was completely wrongly decided. And this wasn't just something that Christians or conservative people viewed as wrongly decided. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a Supreme Court justice who passed away a couple years ago, she also was very pro-abortion, but was very open that it was wrongly decided. It was not a good case. The way that they made the case just didn't work at all. Okay. So essentially what this means of overturning Roe v. Wade, what they said is that the Constitution does not confer the right to abortion. So this means that it goes back to a state-by-state decision, which is the same as anything that's not clearly laid out in the Constitution, right? True. Anything that's not in the Constitution goes back to the states, as it should. The reality of this, which is so interesting, is that people in general actually want, I can't remember the exact statistic, I apologize, I don't have it on my brain, but we've done research about, millennials and just Americans in general of what they want, and what they want is to have a vote in the abortion issue. Well, with Roe v. Wade in place, we didn't have a vote on the abortion issue, and we now do. Because it's state to state, we are able to elect representatives that are able to legislate based off of what we think should take place, which is why we have all these, states that are pro-life that have now banned abortion or in the process of banning abortion or extremely limiting it. And we also have states that are very pro-abortion that are expanding abortion access and now saying, no, we're going to be an abortion sanctuary state and let everyone come here and have abortions here if you can't get it in your own state. So, but the whole point of it is that now we have a vote on it, and we always should have had a vote on it because it wasn't in the Constitution in the first place.
So what about people fearing legal consequences from going to abortion in one state and coming back to their states?
Yeah, that's a new one that we've been trying to work through. I'll be honest, I don't have a full answer on that right now because there's a lot of different ideas currently floating around of how we can legislate certain ways to do certain things. And because it's so new, I don't have an informed opinion on that, but that has been a big discussion, right? Of like consequences for things. I will put it out there that our organization and all reputable pro-life organizations, reputable ones, I will say, we don't believe in criminalizing a woman for having an abortion. I think that's a very, very big thing to put out there because there's this hysteria of, oh my gosh, if I have an abortion, I'm going to go to jail. But no, like we don't believe that women should be jailed for their abortion. We think it's the abortionist that deserves to be jailed for the abortion, not the woman who's experienced a difficult circumstance in her life. I think that's a very big distinction. We don't want women to be prosecuted when they're in this crisis situation and they're just doing everything they can to figure their life out and get out of this crisis. Yeah,
but then, I mean, since it's like the confidentiality between the doctor and the patient, how does the state get to know if it did happen, or they have to record? Okay, I mean, I know the answer to that already. So the hospital takes record of all of these things, so it definitely comes out that they did. So,
well, actually, hospitals don't keep it. We actually don't have a national abortion reporting law. Wow. Believe it or not. So our numbers, when you hear people say, 63 million plus children have died through abortion since Roe v. Wade, that's actually not 100% accurate, likely, because we actually don't know, because there's no national abortion reporting law, which is crazy. You'd assume there would be, but there's not.
Thought, because I was going to ask that question, then I thought there should be one. So I should have asked the question anyway. All right. So, okay. So what does it mean to be pro-life? What does it mean to stand for life? What does it mean?
Yeah, to be pro-life, honestly, I think it's synonymous with anti-abortion. Personally, I think people want to pull a lot of other political issues into it. I get a lot of the Instagram DMs of, if you were really pro-life, then you would XYZ, whatever political take they want. And, I don't really care about other political takes, to be honest. Like I'm willing to look at all sides of the argument on anything, but to me, I don't ever want to change the reality of being pro-life as being anti-abortion and against the innocent killing of another human being. And it also does, like I said earlier, it's conception to natural death too, right? Like I'm against taking another person's life, whatever point of life that tends to be. I think from the moment of conception that's what it is. And being pro-life, I think the reason that we work with student groups so heavily is because I personally, growing up, I just saw so many pro-life people that it seemed like it was just old people, right? It just seemed like old people that were yelling outside of abortion facilities, and that's what I knew as pro-life. But then coming into seeing my peers, seeing students that are 12, 13 years old that are going out and protesting, or that are going out and pulling together resources for their pregnancy center, right? Going and volunteering. And like just a few months ago, I had a student group in Virginia that they put together over 60 Easter baskets for single moms in the area that couldn't put together Easter baskets for their kids. They took donations and then they put all these Easter baskets together for them. Just like small things that we can do to support people, not just through their pregnancy, but even beyond their pregnancy, to show that we're here for them and that we stand with them.
All right. So basically meaning that pro-life is not just about abortion. It goes beyond, let me not just say abortion. It goes beyond pregnancy till when you naturally die. So you're standing not just for people not being aborted, but you're also standing for people having to live like a secured life till they naturally die in this life.
I am all about empowering women, right? I'm not gonna lie.
So what about the men?
I'm a little feminist, not gonna lie. I am all about empowering people, and you know, I like I said, I think it's very clearly anti-abortion. That's kind of what I focus on more than anything. But again, there's this reality of, we have to look at the issue of, if women aren't going to have abortions, what's their other option? We have to answer this question, because
Yes.
Who else is going to? So it does land on us to answer those questions. We, Students for Life, we have a website that we relaunched at the beginning of this year. It's called standingwithyou.org. And it's so good. It's my favorite thing to talk about ever, because what we did was, there was all these resources that existed all across the country, and we put them all onto one website where people can get to whatever they need. So
Okay.
wherever you are, like if you're in Indiana or California, wherever, you can put your zip code in, and it'll show you all kinds of resources, and not just, like I said, the diapers and the baby bottles and things like that, which are a big expense that people need help with, but also, do you need help finding insurance? Do you need help finding a job? Do you need help finding housing? Do you need help with childcare so you can work while you're caring for your child? Like, that we wanted to put everything in one place to show people that, hey, it's not just, we're going to force you to be pregnant and then you're on your own. It's, we want to stand with you through this process, and we want to come alongside you and be there for what this means, because it is a big life change. You know, I would never look at a woman who's experiencing an unexpected pregnancy and be like, oh, get over it, your life will just continue living. No, like, it's going to be a big change for that person, and we want to be there to help them process through what's happened that was unexpected, and then move forward in how we can help you thrive.
Okay. So I have this like question, which let me just read it. If children are born from a woman that does not want the children, and they go into foster care, and the foster care system is being populated, what is the solution for the overpopulation?
Okay. So, there's a lot of different aspects with that one. I will say overpopulation, I don't want to go super in depth on this because I'm not an expert on this particular subject, but overpopulation is a myth. We are not overpopulated. We're actually a little severely underpopulated, which is kind of scary. So that's one thing. But as far as I think the foster care system and adoption system are really important things to talk about. We've been talking about that a lot the past several months. I think it's important to distinguish the difference between the two, because with the foster care system, the goal is to reunite the child with their parent. Normally it's a parent that's going through an addiction or, you know, something of the sort, where they are not able to be fully present to parent at the time. So the child would go into the foster care system to be eventually reunited with their parent, hopefully. The adoption system is very different in the sense of that would be what some people would deem as an unwanted. I don't believe anybody should be called unwanted, because I think everyone should be wanted, but that would fall into that category of placing your child with an adoptive family. Either way, both of those systems need work, and I will admit that we've been pushing for legislation to help with both of those things for a while now. Like I said, I spent a lot of time on campuses. And the past semester, the spring semester this year, one of the big things that I pushed on campuses was I had a petition, and we did this nationwide, of this petition for foster care and adoption reform, because it's needed. Like, there are so many people that go through the foster care system that are extremely traumatized by it, right? There's amazing foster families. I know a lot of them that are incredible, but there's also some not so great foster families, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make that system better. So we want to work on that, which is why we had a petition for it. On the adoption end of things, there's actually around 30 families that are wanting to adopt for every one child available for adoption. So there's so many people that are just dying to have children and care for children and be a parent, and they're not able to because abortion is such a prevalent issue. The big issue with the adoption side that we want to reform for that side of it is just unnecessary cost and administrative red tape. It takes so incredibly long for people to get through an adoption process. And it's crazy expensive. And these people that would be such great parents that can't afford all these crazy thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars of legal fees and things they have to go through. So I know I'm kind of ranting a little bit on this one, but essentially I think both of those systems need work. But it's really important to note that I think people think that the foster care system will just be overwhelmed with millions of children, and that's just not really the reality of how the systems work.
Okay, so what about teaching people abstinence? So I'm going to go from abstinence to the next level. All right. Yeah.
That's a big one too. I think it's so sad because people are so afraid to teach abstinence these days, and it's because they deem abstinence as only a religious thing. But I know a lot of people that have chosen to be abstinent that are not religious at all. They're an atheist and they just decide to be abstinent because it is a good option, and it's not taught enough. And I think there's also this reality of teaching people abstinence, but also teaching people sexual responsibility, I think, is a big one that's just really not talked about, of this reality of, regardless of what contraception method you're using, a barrier method or whatever you're using, it's not 100% effective. If you are sexually active, then there is a possibility, however small, of becoming pregnant. So if you are going into engaging in those activities, you have to do so knowing that a pregnancy could result from that, and you are choosing to take the responsibility for that pregnancy at that case, right? Consent to sex is consent to pregnancy, no matter what type of contraceptive you're using. And the only 100% guaranteed way to not become pregnant is abstinence. So if you really feel like you're not ready, that's the best option. Yeah.
And then, so what about Plan B?
Plan B is abortifacient, or potentially abortifacient, depending on how you look at it. Essentially, Plan B, it's a morning after pill, if you haven't heard of it. So for anyone that's watching that hasn't heard of Plan B, it's an emergency contraceptive is what they call it. So you take it the morning after unprotected sex, and it's supposed to prevent pregnancy. Well, what it really does is prevent implantation. So if, like we talked about earlier, from the moment of conception, it's a unique living whole human being. So that embryo is already a human being, however small, however basic in the cell stages it is, it's still a human being. And preventing the implantation causes that embryo to be dispelled from the woman's body, which would be considered an abortion, right? So Plan B, again, there's a lot of intricacies with it. So I'm not saying it's always 100% of the time abortifacient, but it is potentially abortifacient. And as an organization and as a pro-life person myself personally, I am against emergency contraception or any hormonal contraception.
So why are you against it? Are you against it because it will terminate like the formation of a baby, or you're against it because it won't be effective? Which is which?
I'm against it because it could potentially cause an abortion. And I think anything that we're like, and birth control is the same way, by the way, birth control pills, those are the same thing, where the first line of defense with the birth control pill is to prevent sperm and egg from meeting and forming a human being, right?
Yeah.
And that's all fine and good. But the backup mechanism is preventing implantation of the embryo, which causes the woman to have an abortion. And it's so early on, you wouldn't even know that it's happening. There would be no way of knowing. It would just be happening in your body. Again, abortion ends the life of a human being. So even at those early cell stages, it's still a human being. My mind, the example that I always go to, right? If I'm driving down the road at night and it's dark and I can't see very well and there's something laying across the road, it could be a tree branch, it could be a coat that fell out of someone's window, or it could be a person. But the point is, I don't keep driving, right? You don't just keep going because you could be potentially hurting another person, and that's not okay. You stop and you don't go straight over them. That's kind of where my view lands on Plan B, abortifacient, birth controls, things like that, is because you could be potentially taking the life of another human being. You don't just keep doing it.
Okay. And then, so what about condoms and other contraceptives? Have you actually told people to, I mean, sometimes it's hard for people who are sexually active to abstain from sex because they're used to a certain feeling, they can't just leave it behind. And so instead of telling them to abstain, have you told them to go for condoms and other contraceptives that will help limit pregnancy from happening?
Right. I refrain from giving people advice on what they should do or shouldn't do because it's so nuanced in what your worldview is, right? Like as a Christian, I believe that sex outside of the context of marriage is wrong, right? So I would never want to recommend that somebody have sex with a condom because I don't think that they should be having sex outside of marriage anyway. But my goal is to educate people, right? So again, I don't have an issue with condom usage or within marriage too. Like I don't have an issues with barrier method. And there are some denominations of Christians, and I know Catholic people in general are against the use of that for religious reasons. But from a pro-life standpoint, until the sperm and egg meet, that's not a human being. It's just, part of the mother and part of the father at that point because they contain the mother and father's DNA. So using a barrier method like a condom or like spermicide or something like that, that prevents that embryo from being created, from conception from happening, then I have no issue with that. And my goal is just to educate people on those things. So, my answer is if you are going to engage in sex and you're looking for a birth control method, the best would be natural family planning, of being in tune with your cycle as a woman and knowing, where you are in your cycle as far as ovulation and things like that, of maybe avoiding sexual activity around your time of ovulation when you could be at a greater risk of becoming pregnant, and then using a barrier method contraception like a condom if that's what you're looking for. But again, it's just so difficult because everyone has such different beliefs and worldviews on those things.
I mean, so let's go a little bit from the Christian view, and then let's look at it from like more of a scientific view. I mean, it's okay to tell someone to use condoms. It's okay to tell someone, especially someone who doesn't have the same beliefs as you, that they could use contraceptives, they could use condoms, and especially people who are already married who don't want to have kids anymore. The man could do a vasectomy that would help him not impregnate his wife. So there are so many things that I think sometimes haven't been properly taught, and people don't really have these ideas out there. So it makes it hard for people to just know their options and tend to limit themselves just to abortion.
Right. No, I agree with that. And that goes back to something I said like way earlier on too, of this idea of bodily autonomy and doing whatever you would want to do. So if you want to have a vasectomy because that's the birth control method that you are choosing to use, you have every right to do so. Like I'm okay with people doing whatever they want to do. And condoms do have a very high efficacy rate. It's like, I think it's like 98% when used properly. So that's very high percentage of success in using condom as a birth control method, as long as you are going into it with the knowledge that it still might not be 100% effective. There's still this possibility, and having this openness of being responsible for this other person if they are created through a biological act that biologically that's how we procreate. It's a possibility of happening.
Okay, so contraceptive. So you're talking of sexual responsibility. Is it just the woman's job to be sexually responsible, or it's both parties?
It's both parties. It takes two to tango, right?
Yeah, but then it's always on the woman to be sexually responsible. That's one of the things society has always like hammered on.
Yeah, oh man, I'm big on responsibility from both parties. It takes two people to create another person. And I think that is a big thing too. It's funny because I'm on TikTok a lot. I make TikToks. I love TikTok. And I've seen so many TikToks of like, okay, well, if you're going to force us to be pregnant, then you have to force, the guy to stay and help pay for the child's life. And I'm like, yup, because he created, like, I agree.
No, but then I don't agree with you, because you have to decide to have sex with a responsible person who's going to stay.
What do you mean? Like, explain further.
So the woman has to be the one to decide whoever she's going to have sex with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the responsibility this time lies with the woman. So you don't just have sex with anyone looking forward that he's going to take care of your child if the baby is going to be born. But then you can see, you can definitely tell who's responsible and who's not. So you can't just have sex with anyone and expect responsibility from them.
No, I agree with you on that. I think there is a reality of consensual sex. You have kind of this responsibility of picking good partners. Like, if you are going to do it, maybe be a little bit picky about who you choose to have sex with, and have sex with somebody that you feel confident would support you in that. But either way, still, even if it's an irresponsible person that is engaging in this activity with this woman, right? He's still even if they don't want to be responsible, they are responsible for the creation of another human being, and that is something that they're going to have to be a part of. You can't just decide, I'm going to engage in this with another person and I want to do this and I'm consenting, this is great. Okay, she's pregnant. Well, now I'm out. Well, she doesn't necessarily have that choice, right? So he shouldn't have that choice either. Again, it takes two people to create another human being.
Exactly. But then the man is not carrying the baby. And mostly mothers are more connected to their babies and their kids than the men. So the men just to run off, and then you never see them again until probably the child is old enough and then is already like some big person, and then they want to come around again and be nice and be a family again. But then there's no way and there's no law that is going to force any man to be responsible. The woman is the one who always has to be responsible, because she's the one going to carry the pregnancy. She's the one going to probably raise the child. No matter how much money the man brings, it's still not going to change anything, because you need both parents in the child's life to be able to groom that child to become who he or she has to be. I remember one time there was this lady, there was a place I worked in Delaware, who, when she came, she was probably 19 and she was pregnant. So I was very inquisitive to ask her, I mean, how did you get pregnant? Because like she said, she just went to visit a friend and then it happened. I'm like, it doesn't just happen.
Right.
You thought of it. So why didn't you take measures to be able to prevent the pregnancy from happening? The sex you can prevent, but you know very well you're going to have sex. Why didn't you do anything to prevent the pregnancy from coming? And then she just started to look at me, and the guy was not ready to be in the life of the baby. And she's just 19.
Yeah.
And she was working and she was pregnant and she has to go and give birth and take care of the child alone. So it boils down to the fact that we women have to, don't let your guard down. Don't just let things happen to you and then expect other people to be responsible with you. They're just going to be responsible as long as they want to be. Because there's no law that is going to force the man to be responsible. The only thing that you might get from them is child support, and that might be nothing. And
and you can't control other people, and that's you can't control what other people do and don't do. I will say that's why I am a big advocate of adoption too, because I also don't think it's fair for a guy to just evade the whole situation, and now this teenage girl's entire life is derailed and she has no choice. I will say there's a lot of women that go through an unexpected pregnancy that, like you said, get very attached and they want to be a parent and they decide that they want to be a single parent, which is great. But I'm not into forcing being a parent, right? So if you really feel that you can't do it on your own, that's where adoption is just such a good option. And the other thing too, of the woman being able to decide what type of adoption too, like open versus closed adoption, and also even just choosing the family she's comfortable with, like all those things are up to her. Because I don't know. Again, actually, I mentioned earlier, I'm a little feminist, so I don't think it's fair for
no,
it's not. On her.
That's the point. I mean, it's not fair. That is why, like, you have to protect yourself from
Right.
that unfairness. So Margaret is saying, like, there should be repercussions for men, so that, like, to be more responsible for like situations like this. But then, unfortunately, there are no repercussions. I mean, unless there is, that I don't know of.
Yeah, I mean, child support's the big one. I've heard a lot of ideas on how to make this happen. I haven't like looked into that, because my first thing is abortion, and that's what I'm fighting more than anything. But I'm open to hearing ideas from people on this. But yeah, it's unfortunate, and that's why, again, this sexual responsibility also including, like you mentioned earlier, choosing who you are going to have sex with, and you know what's going to be a good sexual partner for you. And it's sad.
All right. So, I mean, we've already done our time is up, and then the conversation is now getting interesting and everything. Yeah. So I'm just going to give you like a few minutes just to wrap it up, and then tell us like everything you've probably, maybe there's something you wrote down that I didn't ask and you want to share it, and then we just wrap it up. Like a few minutes.
I think we went over a lot of the things that I was wanting to hit. So that was really great. I think the biggest thing, my biggest takeaway currently with, we talked a little bit about Roe v. Wade, and, Roe v. Wade has now been overturned, and it's gone back to the states. And I think there's this huge reality of fear. And that's the big thing that I've been noticing more than anything. And to the extent of, I've had people get really upset with me, when I post something of celebrating, because I was there. I was at the Supreme Court when it was overturned, and I celebrated hard. And I posted a lot of things about, because I've been working on this for a while. And I mean, I've only been working on this for like a year and a half, and all these people for 49 years that worked on this. It was a huge victory. But I did have people that were really hurt by seeing what I said, and not that I would ever change what I said, because I stand by it. I'm very careful about the way I say things online, because I want to be a safe place for people to talk to me. But I think I had a lot of people upset because they are actually afraid for women's rights in general. They're afraid for people's rights in our country, and they felt that celebration was not sensitive to what people were experiencing. And I am so sensitive to that. I'm not going to belittle someone who is experiencing fear, because again, like I mentioned earlier, there's so much misinformation around this topic. And if you're told constantly your rights are being taken away as a woman, that sounds pretty terrifying. Like if I didn't know what was happening, I'd probably be a little bit terrified too, because again, feminist, I'm a powerful woman, and I don't want my rights taken away. But I want people to know that that's not the reality, and we want to empower people to have their basic human rights. And that's actually what this stems from, is we want human beings from conception to have their basic human rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's what we're fighting for. And we're doing everything we can to make sure that people are supported. And the other thing too, because to tie it back into the fact that this is a Christian podcast, and we are Christians and that are talking about this, there's a really sad statistic. I wish I had the exact number, but it's in the like 40%, I think, believe. Women, a very high percentage of women don't feel comfortable talking about their pregnancy options in churches. And that's a big problem. Or I think it was 40-something% of women that had an abortion have been in church services around the time of their abortion. Okay. So these are people that are going through this, that are in our congregation with us on Sundays. They sit right next to us. They listen to the sermon, but they don't feel comfortable coming forward and saying something about it or asking for help. And it feels easier to just go have an abortion than to deal with the shame, to deal with being so it means that the church looks more judgmental than it actually is, because for my church, we are non-judgmental.
Because I've seen very judgmental churches, and then it tends to turn people away rather than draw people closer to God. But that's another topic. So let me not get into it. Yeah. So I mean, so what else? So is there anything else you want to share? And then I think one of the things people really like that I'm seeing the comment is the sexual responsibility. You know, it's like the most important part of like the highlights for me in this topic, because as a woman, you should be able to like decide for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think people should rather spend time championing on abstinence and responsibility during sexual activities rather than just championing for abortion, because you're trying to say, I'm just going to be reckless in my sexual activities, and then peradventure, if I'm pregnant, I'm just going to abort it. Like, I feel that is what people are really clamoring for, than actually saying, why don't we either abstain or have sex with condoms or other contraceptives or whatever it is, so that we don't get to the point where we need to abort a human being. I mean, so what do you think of that before we go?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Because what we've been told as pro-lifers for a very long time, right, is that, sex education is going to lower the level of abortions, right? And that didn't necessarily happen. We had more sex education and abortions were still happening. But what actually is going to change things is that now that Roe's overturned, there's people that, as a form of protest, they're going on sex strikes, and they're like, I'm not going to have sex anymore. And I'm
That's
like,
good.
Great. That sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah.
You could have been doing that the whole time. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a new concept. So I agree. I think, like, letting people know, like, there are other options. You can abstain, you can use condoms, you can work around your cycle. Like, there are other options out there outside of abortion. And even because I will say there's people that use abortion almost as a form of birth control, where they have so many, but there's also a lot of people that are actually in scary situations. So I don't want to make light of it, but there is a reality of sexual responsibility, choosing your sexual partners wisely, choosing when and if you have sex wisely makes such a huge difference, I think.
Yes. So I mean, there was another question that was coming, but they just left. So let's see. So pro-choice people, I mean, what one word for pro-choice people, what would you call them? Or what would you say about them?
Pro-choice people, I just would invite to a conversation more than anything. Honestly, find someone that is pro-life and actually seems pro-life, that is actually kind and loving, and like seriously reach out. I mean, my DMs are always open. Reach out to me. I don't mind. Just start a conversation. I think on both sides, to pro-life and pro-choice people, don't assume what the other person's thinking. Don't assume what the other side believes, and be willing to talk about it. And I think having conversations about these tough topics are how we're actually going to end up changing things.
Yes, but I think there was one thing I wanted to share. So in Ghana, where I come from, whilst I was growing up, one of the things that was very paramount and very important on TV, in school and everywhere was sex education. So most of the things I'm discussing with you now, I learned them when I was like pretty young. That you don't want to have sex without condoms because you can catch STDs.
Right.
You can impregnate someone. So these are things that I think that most of the young people I've found in this country have zero idea on all of this education, and they tend to just do anything and then want to live with the consequences, or want the whole world to live with the consequences of their decisions.
Yeah, I'm all about expanding sex education. I have no problem with it. My only caveat with that is that a lot of sex education in our country that does happen comes from Planned Parenthood and sources like Planned Parenthood. And we have to look at, first of all, it hasn't been very effective what they've done. Second of all, it's weird that there's a possibility of them creating their own clientele down the line with what they're teaching. So I'm all about real sex education. And for example, there's one, some of our students actually started a nonprofit organization called Worth It. And they are working on sex education that's based around this idea of valuing yourself, with the conversation of sex and seeing yourself as a valuable person that's deserving of worth. And I think that's such a great way to handle it. And that's the direction we need to be moving with sex education, of not just because I obviously, like you said, there's so many people that just don't know because it hasn't been very well done. I think we can do it a lot better.
Yes. So I think that the church should also be ready to teach sex education.
That's
the
interesting. That's
schools.
an interesting concept.
No, because then
Yeah.
in my church in Ghana, I learned most of these things in church as well.
Oh,
So there
really?
was,
Okay.
yes, I mean, my mom also did teach me about a lot of things about sex. So you don't grow up just green without knowing anything about sex and sex education, because then you tend to fall prey to anything and everything. Because if a guy is just talking to you, trying to have sex with you, because of what you've been taught, you know how to fight and withstand such temptations. If a lady just comes up with you and want to have sex with you, you have no idea where she's been, no idea what spirit she carries. I mean, I'm even getting spiritual with it, but then you have no idea all of these things, and you just go ahead to want to have sex with her. If we don't teach these things, then we're going to keep going on and on about abortion when we can start the whole conversation from the beginning before we even get to abortion.
No, I agree. I think that this is more, churches in general need to be more open about these topics, and because I didn't know if I was going to share this or not. I hope it's okay. I apologize for going over time, but
go ahead.
I grew up in a Christian household that we really didn't talk about this stuff very much. Okay. And when I was in college, I did have an unplanned pregnancy when I was 19. No, I was 18. I was 18. Sorry. When I was 18, I had an unplanned pregnancy, and I looking back on it, it could have been so easily prevented if I had a little bit more information. Again, I shouldn't have been having sex in the first place. Like, let's be real. But maybe if I had had a little bit more information about it, then it could have had a different result than it did.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's like a good thing to share. So when we tend to teach people, then they get to like help themselves and not get into trouble before we come out telling them what to do and what not to do. I think so. Probably we should be able to do. Now we've gone past our time, so I'm hoping that we'll do this again, and probably we'll go further from abortion and then find an interesting topic to talk about. But all the same, it was good to see you and good to have you here, Hannah. And I mean, the comments and then the reactions are just great. And thank you for your information. Thank you for your depth and in-depth knowledge about abortion and all the things we've discussed. And God bless you so much for coming.
Yes, thank you for having me.
All right. So thank you, all my viewers and listeners. And please help us share, comment, and tell us anything you know. And if there's any question, I'll just forward it to her. She should answer, and then I'll give it back to you guys. So